Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jack Douglas with another Armchair Vacation in America. This is the lake which forms the northern terminus of one of America's most important waterways. The waterway stretches from the Canadian border down to the mouth of a mighty river in the great city of New York. And over this path came the explorers whose names are engraved on the pages of American history, notably Samuel de Champlain and Henry Hudson. Also along this waterway are such colorful places as Fort Ticonderoga, Saratoga Springs, West Point, and the Roosevelt family home at Hyde Park. The lake is Lake Champlain, the river is the Hudson, and this is your journey and mine too, the lake and the river. The blue waters of Lake Champlain lie between Vermont's Green Mountains and the great Adirondacks of New York State. With a length of 136 miles, this magnificent lake offers numerous sandy beaches and quiet, sheltered harbors for small boats. You can even fly in by seaplane. Another attraction is the large group of islands in the lake. We start our trip from the city of Burlington, Vermont. We're driving across one of the natural sandbars that connect the mainland with several of those islands. These excellent highways are built right on the sandbars, making our drive both easy and interesting. Our destination is Grand Isle, the largest tract of land in Lake Champlain. Arriving on the island, we find broad green pastures and numerous farms, making us forget for a moment that we're surrounded by water. Many of the people here are descended from old Yankee stock. Most of them lead quiet lives, working as dairy farmers. Naturally, everything stops when a herd of milk cows makes its way leisurely down one of the main roads. This scene gives us some idea of the slow pace of life on Grand Isle. If you're the type who likes to really get away from the tempo of the 20th century, then Grand Isle may be just the spot you're looking for. A nominal fee obtains a camping permit and allows you to pitch your tent and let the rest of the world go by. Not far from the camping area is this attractive beach. The sun is warm, the water reflects the azure blue of the sky, and you forget about the pressures of everyday living. Running between Grand Isle and the mainland of New York State is a ferry boat that offers not only transportation, but a beautiful view of the lake as well. Our destination is the city of Plattsburgh, New York. The ferry boat operates, by the way, every 40 minutes from April 1st through December 30th. The charge per car is $2, including the driver. Other adults, 50 cents, and children, a quarter. The ferry can carry 12 cars and also accommodates trailers, small buses, and campers. We're underway now, and the crossing time to the mainland of New York is about 12 minutes. The ferry docks at Cumberland Head in upper New York State. And now we're en route to the city of Plattsburgh on the western shore of Lake Champlain. Where these large buildings and churches now stand, the great Indian tribes of the northeastern territories once camped, the Algonquins, the Iroquois, and the Hurons. In a tree-shaded park facing the lake that bears his name is this statue of the great French explorer Champlain. And the plaque reads, "The first European to behold our great forests and lofty mountains, the first to traverse this inland waterway which later became so rich in fame," end quote. In 1609, Champlain was the first white man to see this great body of water. On the far side of Plattsburgh Bay is a tall stone monument commemorating the victory of Commodore Thomas McDonough in the Battle of Plattsburgh. It was on September 11, 1814, that the United States fleet fought the decisive naval battle in the War of 1812. And when the last cannon had boomed, the British squadron had been crippled, its ships drifting on the lake in a ragged line. This sign on U.S. Route 9, 16 miles south of Plattsburgh, takes us to the Au Sable Chasm. First opened in 1870, the chasm is formed by sandstone cliffs that were created about 500 million years ago. In the depths of the gorge, hemmed in by the rocky walls, the shadows are deep, the atmosphere gloomy. But then we suddenly come into a burst of sunlight, surrounded by the beauty of towering fortress-like cliffs, green trees, and a clear blue sky. This impressive scenic wonder, Au Sable Chasm, was cut through countless layers of rock by the Au Sable River, which finally spends itself in the waters of Lake Champlain. At the southern part of Lake Champlain, Fort Ticonderoga stands on a high bluff overlooking the lake. The fort is open every day to visitors from mid-May to mid-October, and an impressive sight awaits us at every turn. The drama of American history is in evidence. Old cannons, silenced now, but still aimed toward the approaches to the fortress, waving above the ramparts the flags of the armies of England, France, and the United States. In the foreground, the 13 stars of the original American colonies. In the background, the 50 stars of today's America. In one of the archways, this plaque lists the names of famous men who passed through the old fort. George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, the infamous Benedict Arnold, Ethan Allen, Seth Warner, and Major Robert Rogers. The soldiers dressed in blue and red costumes are part of the color and ceremony to be seen here every day. The boys in blue are called the Marines, and those in red, the French artillery. The man in white is the French-speaking captain. Let's listen as he gives his commands to the Marines.
Attention! Gorge dans la lumière. Le mortier. La poudre. Poudre à mortier. Courage. Prenez la demoiselle. Foulez. Laissez mortier. Levier.
Part of the entertainment at Fort Ticonderoga is a bagpiper dressed in the tartans of the famous Black Watch. In 1759, these Scotsmen, the 42nd Highlanders, took part in a 4-day siege of the fort. On July 27, the French admitted defeat, and the British occupied the fortress, naming it Ticonderoga. Fort Ticonderoga, an important stop along the shores of Lake Champlain. 39 miles south of Fort Ticonderoga is a scenic area they call Top of the World, high above Lake George. Although considerably smaller than Champlain, this lake, with its heavily forested shoreline and dark green islands, is no less beautiful. One of the attractions is an excellent restaurant that offers service on a broad terrace overlooking the lake. One of the best ways to see this panorama of water and mountains is from horseback. For $2 an hour, we can enjoy a leisurely ride, soaking up sunshine and just looking at some of the most beautiful scenery in upper New York State. Or we can rent one of these inboard powerboats and explore the lake to our heart's content. If an excursion boat is more to your liking, the good ship Ticonderoga makes 2 trips a day, taking you on a 3-hour cruise of Lake George. On our vacation to the lake and the river. In a park in New York City, a memorial to Henry Hudson faces the river named in his honor. A British sea captain and adventurer, Hudson sailed and discovered the river in 1609 in his famous ship, the Half Moon, searching for a passage to the Far East. High in the Adirondack Mountains, the river has its beginning. This quiet creek flows into Lake Tear of the Clouds on Mount Marcy. Then, spilling out from the lake, it finds its way to the lowlands and finally emerges as the mighty Hudson River. Heading south, we're about 11 miles west of the riverbank at the city of Saratoga Springs. First named by Mohawk Indians who called it the place of the swift waters, Saratoga Springs is famous for a variety of reasons. One of its oldest and most exciting attractions is, of course, the Saratoga Race Course, dating back to 1864. This is the nation's oldest active thoroughbred racetrack. At the National Museum of Racing here, Mr. and Mrs. Anthony Giuliano of New York City look at some of the beautiful paintings of famous horses. Man o' War racing as a 2-year-old at Belmont Park, one of the all-time greats. Citation. As a 3-year-old, he won the Triple Crown, the Kentucky Derby, Preakness, and Belmont Stakes, the first horse in history to win $1 million. Seabiscuit. For 5 years, he dominated the American racetrack scene. When 7 years old, he won the Santa Anita Handicap, the first $100,000 race in the United States. Also at the museum, an eye-catching display of famous racing colors. The gold and red of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth of Great Britain. The dark blue and silver stripes of the American financier Bernard Baruch. The blue and gold of one of America's favorite entertainers, Fred Astaire. Pink with white polka dots, the colors of Bingland Stables, owned by Bing Crosby. A white cap with red and white diamond shirt, the colors of Alfred G. Vanderbilt. Light blue and purple horizontal stripes, the racing colors of George D. Widener, president of the National Museum of Racing. Another reason for coming to Saratoga Springs is Congress Park. Its history goes back to the days when Saratoga Springs was one of the most famous gambling resorts in eastern America. The large building in the background is the old casino, once owned by Richard Canfield, sometimes called the Prince of Gamblers. These two stark white vases stagger the imagination when we consider their history. Called Night and Day, they were created in a single 24-hour period. The sculptor was Bertel Thorvaldsen of Denmark. The time was 1815. They were brought here to Congress Park in 1824. At Saratoga Spa State Park, we're in for a surprise, and this is it, a real geyser. No, not the size of Yellowstone Park's Old Faithful, but a geyser nevertheless. The park was established in 1909 and is known for its warm mineral water springs. The young lady having her picture taken is persuaded to try some of the mineral water. But after one taste, she decides that old city water back home isn't so bad after all. The strange taste, of course, comes from the amount of alkali present in the soil. 8 miles from the town of Schuylerville, New York, is the Saratoga National Historical Park. This is the site of old Fort Nielsen, and on this hallowed ground, American patriots died fighting for freedom from Great Britain in 1777. During the battles of Saratoga, the colonial soldiers fortified a log cabin which stood here. It was a part of a farm owned by a man named John Nielsen. The blockhouse is a reproduction of a typical frontier fort of that period. From these heights near the Nielsen barn, American troops advanced on 2 different occasions to meet the British in battle, September 19th and October 17, 1777. The decisive American victory in that second battle, followed by Burgoyne's surrender to General Gates, spelled the end of England's attempt to crush the uprising in the young American colonies. Continuing our journey south, we pause along the banks of the Champlain Canal, a man-made waterway that makes it possible to travel by powerboat up the Hudson River from New York City, then through this canal, and finally into Lake Champlain. Let's go along with this boat as it approaches a set of locks on the Champlain Canal. She's the Hunter X from Orange, New Jersey. We're slowing down now as we approach the locks, which are supervised by the New York State Department of Public Works. There are very strict rules, by the way, as they make the passage through the locks. Boats must proceed at reduced speed and are not allowed to pass another craft within 1,000 feet of the gates. Once inside the lock, boats must be moored. Then, when the water level in the lock chamber reaches the level of the pool, the gates open and the vessel goes on its way into Lake Champlain. We arrive now at New York State's capital city, Albany. This imposing old mansion is one of the most interesting historical houses in the city. It's the home of Major General Philip Schuyler, a patriot, statesman, and military leader of the American Revolution. Inside, we can browse through the Hamilton Room, named for Alexander Hamilton, one of the architects of the Constitution. He married General Schuyler's daughter, Elizabeth, and the marriage took place in this room in December 1780. Among the beautiful antiques here are these Delftware vases. They were made in 1760 by Anthony Kreisweg, considered one of Holland's master potters. Also, this Chinese porcelain-covered urn. It was once owned by the mother of our country's first president, Mary Ball Washington. This cut in the wood of the stair railing recalls a frightening story. In August 1781, British Tories and Indians broke into the house, bent upon capturing General Schuyler. An Indian tomahawk left this scar, but General Schuyler escaped unharmed. We're on our way to the city of Hudson, New York, on the east bank of the Hudson River. The bridge is the Rip Van Winkle, and it takes us to the site of the Volunteer Fireman's Home, also known as the American Museum of Firefighting. It's an outstanding collection of early American firemen's equipment. For example, this is the first fire engine used in this country. Built in England in 1725, it was bought by the city of New York in 1731. And how about this shiny, ornate double-decker engine, which was built in Philadelphia in 1846? Yes, it's a fire engine. And it was pulled and pumped by hand. The ornate wood carvings are outstanding examples of the artistry achieved by fire engine designers in the old days of the volunteer firemen. This painted panel depicts the rescue of Captain John Smith by Pocahontas. And here's a beautiful and elegant machine called a parade carriage. Built by the New York Fire Apparatus Works, it was made to be used in parades only, and no expense was spared on its ornamentation. At Hyde Park, New York, the world-famous home of Franklin Delano Roosevelt has been preserved as an historic site. Covering 93 acres on a gently rolling plateau, the land overlooks the Hudson River. It was in this home of James and Sarah Roosevelt that their only son, Franklin, was born on January 30, 1882. Here, the president-to-be spent his boyhood, and it was to this lovely house that he frequently returned in his later life. In the garden, there is a bust of the man who valiantly triumphed over infantile paralysis, and on this map of the grounds, there is a touching quotation by his wife, Eleanor: "My husband's spirit will live in this house, in the library, and in the quiet garden where he wished his body to lie." In that very garden, surrounded by green grass and the color of blooming flowers, a large white monument of Vermont marble stands guard over his grave. He was laid to rest here on April 15, 1945. 17 years later, Mrs. Roosevelt was buried by his side. History already has placed him among America's great presidents, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This now is the outstanding and most famous landmark on the Hudson River, West Point, the home of the United States Military Academy. The main street of Highland Falls, New York, leads us to Thayer Gate, the entrance to the Academy. And once inside, we pause long enough to enjoy the stately beauty of the Cadet Chapel. It's an outstanding example of Gothic architecture. At Trophy Point, relics of wars dating back to the American Revolution have been preserved. This statue of General George Washington reminds us that it was he who first proposed the idea of a school for professional soldiers. In March 1802, West Point was created by act of Congress. During June, July, and August, most of the cadets are away from the academy, participating in a summer training program. But these lads in their battle fatigues have only been here at West Point for 2 weeks. Duty, honor, country. That says it to a T. West Point, the pride of the Hudson and a grateful nation. This building in Tappan, New York is now a restaurant, but it once served as a temporary prison for the British spy, Major John Andre. On September 20, 1780, Andre conspired with the American General Benedict Arnold to turn West Point over to the British forces. Attempting to return to the British lines, Andre was captured, his plan revealed. He was put on trial as a spy in this old Dutch church in Tappan, found guilty, and condemned to die. He was marched up this lonely road that's been called Andre Hill ever since. And here, where this stone marker now stands, he was hanged at the gallows. Driving across the Hudson on the Tappan Zee Bridge, we arrive at Sunnyside, the home of Washington Irving. At the entrance to the author's house is this memorial depicting him with some of the characters from his most famous stories, such as Rip Van Winkle, the dreamer of the Catskills. The character on the left is from Irving's The Alhambra. This charming house holds many memories of Washington Irving, America's first author to receive worldwide recognition. At this desk, he wrote, among other works, The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, The Alhambra, and The Life of George Washington. When he worked late at his writing, Irving would sometimes take a short nap on this bed, then return to his manuscript and write until dawn. Now, finally, the Hudson flows past the shining city of New York and empties into the sea, ending our visit to the lake and the river. When you're near Lake George, do take the youngsters to Storytown, USA. It's all for fun, and it's all a part of the childhood fantasies that each of us can remember, no matter how sophisticated we may be. In a colorful setting of make-believe, the youngsters will meet characters right out of Mother Goose, characters that walk and talk. Little Bo Peep and her favorite lamb, and by the way, this one won't get lost, it's on a leash. There's Moby Dick, the legendary whale, and Cinderella's pumpkin coach is waiting to whisk us away to the ball. We don't see Goldilocks, but the three bears are here, and say, how about a ride in a swan boat? Or perhaps you'd rather catch the old-fashioned Storytown Express. It's a charmer, Storytown, USA. Next week, more faces and places somewhere in America. Until then, this is Jack Douglas saying thank you so much and good night, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.